The love story between Serena Mackenzie and Lawrence Robinson began on a dating app, and within weeks, it led to marriage. It felt like a dream come true. He gave her expensive gifts and a lifestyle she'd never imagined. She gave him affection and loyalty. To those around them, it looked like they'd found something real. But on May 14, 2025, everything changed. Serena disappeared. Her family couldn't reach her. Her friends received strange texts that didn't sound like her. A missing persons report was filed. Search efforts began, but answers were hard to find. Then on May 18th, 2 hikers stumbled upon something in the woods they would never forget. A body. And what investigators found would reveal a truth no one expected. Was there more to this marriage than met the eye? Keep watching to find out.
5:30, we're north of the alleyway, 53rd Street, March 25.
The major reason why a sensational trial is set to be held in February 2026 is because of a gruesome crime committed against a young lady from Tennessee. But who was she? How did she become a victim? To answer that, let's take a brief moment to know her well. Serena Mackenzie was born and raised in South Memphis, Tennessee, in a neighborhood where struggle wasn't the exception. It was the rule. Her father, Byron Mackenzie, had worked at the same factory for 15 years before the layoffs started. The first time he lost his job, he found another one within months. The second time, it took longer. By the third time, he stopped looking with the same hope he used to have. Her mother, Charlene, worked night shifts as a nursing assistant at a local care facility. She came home every morning with swollen feet and a back that never stopped aching. Serena had a younger brother, Stanley, who was 19 and trying to find his way in a world that didn't seem to have much room for people like them. Money was always tight in the Mackenzie household. There were months when the electricity got shut off because the bill went unpaid. There were times when they got eviction notices taped to the front door, and Serena's mother would sit at the kitchen table with her head in her hands, trying to figure out how to stretch $300 across rent, food, and medicine. Serena grew up watching her parents work themselves to exhaustion and still come up short. She wore thrift store clothes to school while other kids showed up in brand new sneakers and designer jeans. She learned quickly that poverty wasn't just about not having money. It was about shame. It was about feeling like you were always one step behind everyone else, no matter how hard you tried. By the time Serena graduated high school, she knew exactly what she didn't want. She didn't want to live paycheck to paycheck. She didn't want to cry over bills or wonder if she could afford to fix her car when it broke down. She didn't want to spend her entire life working herself into the ground just to stay afloat. So she started looking for ways to change her situation. She applied for scholarships, but there were always other students with better grades or better essays. She applied for jobs, but most of them paid minimum wage and required experience she didn't have. She tried waitressing, retail, customer service, anything that would bring in money. But the paychecks were small, and the bills were big. She was barely keeping her head above water. Then her mother's health started declining. Charlene had been dealing with chronic pain for years, but it got worse. She needed medication, physical therapy, doctor's appointments that insurance only partially covered. The medical bills piled up. Serena tried to help. She picked up extra shifts, cut back on everything she could, but it wasn't enough. She felt like she was drowning, and no matter how hard she swam, the surface kept getting further away. She needed money. The kind of money that didn't come from standing behind a register for $8 an hour. She started looking for other options. She applied for personal loans, but her credit wasn't good enough. She looked into gig work, online freelancing, anything that promised quick cash. Some of it worked for a while. She sold clothes online, did odd jobs for neighbors, babysat when she could. But it was inconsistent. There were weeks when she made decent money, and weeks when she made almost nothing. She was exhausted, frustrated, and running out of ideas. That's when her friend Rita brought up the dating apps. Rita had been seeing older men she met online, men with money who were willing to spend it on her. These weren't regular dating apps. These were platforms designed specifically for arrangements. Wealthy men looking for companionship. young women looking for financial support. Rita talked about it loosely, like it was no different than any other job. She showed Serena photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, weekend trips to resorts. "It's not what you think," Rita said. "You're not doing anything wrong. You're just spending time with people who appreciate your company, and they take care of you in return." Serena hesitated. It felt strange, like she was selling something she couldn't quite name. But desperation has a way of making things that once seemed impossible start to feel inevitable. She created a profile. She chose her best photos, wrote a short bio about herself, and waited. The messages came quickly. Older men, most of them in their 50s and 60s, sent her compliments and invitations. Some of them seemed genuine. Others were blunt about what they wanted. At first, Serena went on a few dates. Dinners at nice restaurants, conversations over wine, men who seemed interested in getting to know her. Some of them gave her money afterward. $200 here, $300 there. It helped. It paid for her mother's prescriptions, covered her car payment, kept the lights on. It wasn't what she wanted to be doing, but it worked. For a while. But then the nature of the requests started to change. Some of the men weren't interested in dinner or conversation. They wanted something else, something Serena hadn't signed up for. They wanted hotel rooms and closed doors, and transactions that made her feel sick to her stomach. She went along with it a few times because she needed the money. She told herself it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But every time she left one of those hotel rooms, she felt a little more hollow. She wasn't finding security. She was finding exploitation. The men didn't see her as a person. They saw her as something they could rent for a few hours. She started to pull back, started declining invitations, started questioning whether this was worth it. She felt trapped between two kinds of poverty, the financial kind and the kind that ate away at your sense of self. She was ready to delete her profile and walk away from the whole thing when Lawrence Robinson sent her a message. Now, let's talk about Lawrence Robinson. If you'd asked anyone in Charleston, South Carolina about him, they would have told you he was a success story. He was 67 years old, a real estate mogul with a net worth estimated at $47 million. He owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast, properties that brought in revenue whether he lifted a finger or not. He was a political donor, the kind of man who had governors and senators returning his phone calls. He moved through Charleston's high society with ease, attending charity galas and country club events, always dressed impeccably, always saying the right thing. People admired him. Some envied him. A few feared him, though they would never say so out loud. Lawrence had been married once before. His first marriage lasted 18 years and ended in divorce in 2019. The details of that divorce were sealed by the court, hidden behind legal walls that kept the public from knowing what had really happened. Those who knew Lawrence didn't ask questions. He was a private man, and he preferred to keep certain parts of his life out of view. What people saw was the polished exterior, the wealth, the charm, the confidence. What they didn't see was the rot beneath. In early 2023, Lawrence Robinson was diagnosed with advanced cardiomyopathy. His heart was failing. It was functioning at only 15% capacity, struggling to pump blood through his body. He'd already undergone multiple surgeries, each one attempting to repair the damage, and each one failing. His doctors placed him on the transplant waiting list, but within months, they removed him. He was 67 years old, too old by medical standards. He had a history of alcohol use. He hadn't followed the protocols they'd laid out for him. He was, in their professional opinion, not a viable candidate. They gave him 6 to 12 months to live. That was in late 2024. The clock was ticking. Most people, when told they're dying, go through stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Lawrence Robinson went through none of them. He didn't deny what was happening. He didn't rage against it. He simply refused to accept it. He had spent his entire life accumulating wealth and power, bending the world to his will, making things happen through sheer force of determination and money. And now, because of something as mundane as organ failure, he was supposed to just lie down and die? No, that wasn't acceptable. His money had bought him everything else. Why couldn't it buy him more time? He started researching alternatives. Late at night, alone in his home office, he searched the internet for options that existed outside the bounds of legality. He found forums where people discussed illegal organ networks. He discovered transplant tourism, countries where regulations were weak and ethics were negotiable. He made contact with brokers, middlemen who connected dying patients with organs that came from questionable sources. He wired money to clinics overseas, facilities that promised they could help him if he was willing to pay. He studied blood types, tissue compatibility, surgical procedures. He learned everything there was to know about how hearts could be harvested, preserved, and transplanted outside of a hospital. But there was a problem. Even in the world of illegal transplants, donors were hard to find. Most of the available organs came from people who had already died. Accident victims, overdoses, bodies that had been sitting too long before harvest. Lawrence needed something better. He needed a young, healthy donor. Someone whose heart was strong, viable, undamaged. Someone whose blood type matched his own. And more than that, he needed control. He needed someone who wouldn't be missed. Someone whose disappearance could be explained away. Someone he could access without raising suspicion. Lawrence Robinson wasn't the kind of man who begged for help. He didn't pray. He didn't plead. He planned. He had already decided that if the medical system wouldn't save him, he would save himself. He would find a donor. He would bring that person into his life. And when the time was right, he would take what he needed. In his mind, it wasn't murder. It was survival. It was a business transaction. He'd spent his whole life treating people as assets, resources to be used and discarded when they were no longer useful. This was no different. Before we continue with how Lawrence found Serena, and how she walked straight into a trap she couldn't possibly see coming, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. What comes next isn't just a warning. It's a lesson in how predators hide in plain sight. Lawrence Robinson didn't find Serena Mackenzie by accident. He went looking for her. He knew exactly what he needed, and he knew where to find it. He created profiles on dating apps that catered to arrangements, Seeking Arrangement, Sugar Book, platforms where wealthy men connected with younger women who needed financial support. But Lawrence wasn't browsing casually like most men on those sites. He had specific criteria. He filtered his searches by age, looking for women between 21 and 25. He wanted someone young, someone healthy, someone whose body hadn't been worn down by years of poor living or bad habits. But more than that, he needed someone with a specific blood type. O negative, universal donor, the kind of blood type that would match his own without complications. Lawrence didn't stop at online profiles. He hired a private investigator, a man who specialized in digging up information that wasn't supposed to be public. The investigator ran background checks on potential matches, pulled medical records from databases that weren't legally accessible, and compiled detailed reports on women who fit Lawrence's criteria. It was illegal, invasive, and expensive. But Lawrence didn't care. He had the money, and he had the motivation. When Serena Mackenzie's profile appeared in his search results, the investigator flagged it immediately. She was 23 years old, blood type O negative. She went to the gym regularly, took care of herself, didn't smoke or drink heavily. She was financially vulnerable, struggling to make ends meet, and she was on a dating app looking for someone who could help her. She was perfect. Lawrence sent Serena a message in late 2024. It wasn't like the other messages she'd been getting. It didn't lead with money or demands. Instead, Lawrence wrote something that felt genuine. He complimented her smile, said she seemed intelligent and thoughtful based on her profile. He asked her about her interests, her goals, what she wanted out of life. He didn't mention money at all. He didn't talk about arrangements or expectations. He just talked to her like she was a person worth knowing. Serena had been dealing with men who treated her like a product they could purchase for an evening, so when Lawrence's message came through, it felt different. It felt real. Their first date was at a quiet restaurant, nothing flashy or over the top. Lawrence showed up on time, dressed well but not ostentatiously. He pulled out her chair, asked her how her day had been, and actually listened to her answers. And at the end of the night, he didn't ask her to come back to his place. He didn't proposition her. He just thanked her for her time, told her he'd enjoyed meeting her, and said he hoped they could do it again. Serena went home that night feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone seemed to want more than just her body. Lawrence wasn't rushing her into anything. He wasn't making demands. He was offering her something she'd almost stopped believing existed: respect. He called her the next day, not to arrange another transaction, but just to talk. He sent her good morning texts. He asked how her mother was feeling. He remembered small details from their conversation and brought them up later. When Serena talked about her family's financial struggles, Lawrence didn't judge her. He didn't make her feel like she was begging or desperate. He just listened, nodded, and told her he understood what it was like to feel powerless. She started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. Maybe he actually cared. Their second date was a weekend trip. Lawrence invited her to a bed and breakfast a few hours outside the city, somewhere quiet where they could spend time together without distractions. Serena hesitated at first, but Lawrence assured her there was no pressure. Separate rooms if she wanted, no expectations, just time to get to know each other better. She agreed. That weekend, Lawrence opened up to her in ways he hadn't before. He told her about his first marriage, how it had fallen apart, how his ex-wife had left him feeling abandoned and alone. He painted himself as the victim, a man who had given everything to someone who didn't appreciate him. He talked about his loneliness, how hard it was to meet someone genuine when you had money, how people always wanted something from him. Serena felt herself softening. She saw him not as a wealthy older man, but as someone who was hurting, someone who needed companionship just as much as she needed security. By their third date, Lawrence was talking about the future. He told Serena he wasn't looking for something fleeting. He'd had enough of that in his life. He wanted a partner, someone he could build something real with. He said he could see that with her. He started giving her gifts: a designer handbag, a piece of jewelry, a weekend at a luxury spa. But he framed them as gestures of affection, not transactions. "You deserve this," he'd say. "You deserve to be treated well." He called her constantly, sent her messages throughout the day, made her feel like she was the center of his world. He told her he loved her, and Serena, who had spent so long feeling like she was worth nothing more than a few $100s in a hotel room, believed him. She fell for him, not just for his money, but for the way he made her feel. 3 weeks after they met, Lawrence proposed. He took her to a private location, somewhere quiet and intimate, and got down on one knee. He presented her with an expensive ring and gave her a speech about wanting to spend the rest of his life with her. He talked about how short life was, how he didn't want to waste any more time, how he'd waited so long to find someone like her. Serena said yes. She felt a mixture of love, relief, and disbelief. This was it. This was the security she'd been searching for, the life she'd been dreaming of. Her friends warned her it was too fast. They told her she barely knew him, that something about the whole situation felt wrong. But Serena defended him. "You don't understand him like I do," she said. "He's different. He's not like the others." 2 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. Stanley, Serena's younger brother, was in a scooter accident. It was serious. He'd been hit by a car while riding through an intersection, and the impact had left him with a traumatic brain injury. He was rushed to the ICU, where doctors fought to stabilize him. The prognosis was uncertain. He might recover fully. He might not recover at all. But one thing was certain: the medical bills were already piling up. The hospital estimated the cost of his treatment at over $180,000. Serena's parents, Byron and Charlene, were already drowning in debt. They didn't have insurance that would cover this. They didn't have savings. They had nothing. Serena felt like the ground had collapsed beneath her. Her brother might die, and there was nothing she could do to save him. Lawrence stepped in. He told Serena he would pay for everything. All of Stanley's medical bills, all of his treatment, whatever it took to make sure he got the care he needed. Serena broke down in tears. She couldn't believe it. She felt like Lawrence was saving her family, saving her brother's life. But Lawrence had one condition. "We need to be married first," he said, "for insurance purposes, so I can add him to my coverage. It's just a legal formality, but it'll make everything easier." Serena didn't question it. She didn't ask why it had to be that way. She just trusted him. She saw his offer as proof that he loved her, that he cared about her family as much as she did. She didn't realize she was being used. She didn't realize her desperation was exactly what he'd been counting on. The wedding happened quickly. It was held at a courthouse in late March 2025, just a few weeks after Lawrence's proposal. There was no church, no family, no guests. Lawrence insisted on keeping it intimate. "Let's just make it about us," he said. "We'll celebrate with everyone later." Serena's parents weren't invited. Her friends weren't there. It was just the two of them and a judge. Serena told herself it was romantic, that it was special in its simplicity. But her friends saw it differently. They called her afterward, asking why she hadn't told them, why they hadn't been invited. They said it felt wrong, rushed, secretive. Serena defended Lawrence again. She said he was private, that he didn't like big public displays. She said it was his second marriage, and he wanted it to be different from the first. She made excuses because she needed to believe this was real. Before the wedding, Lawrence had Serena sign a prenup. It was a thick stack of legal documents, filled with language she didn't fully understand. Lawrence's lawyer explained it quickly, glossing over the details. The prenup stated that Serena would receive a $10,000 monthly allowance. If the marriage ended, she wouldn't have any claim to Lawrence's estate. And if she died during the marriage, Lawrence would inherit everything, including a life insurance policy he'd taken out on her without her knowledge, $2 million with him as the sole beneficiary. Serena didn't read it carefully. She didn't ask questions. She trusted Lawrence. She signed her name at the bottom of every page, and just like that, she became his wife. She thought she was securing her future. She had no idea she'd just signed her own death warrant. The first month of marriage felt like a dream to Serena. Lawrence showered her with gifts that she'd only ever seen in magazines or on the Instagram pages of celebrities. He bought her a Range Rover, brand new, with leather seats and every upgrade imaginable. He took her shopping and filled her closet with designer clothes, dresses, shoes, handbags that cost more than her parents made in a month. He even bought a beachfront condo and told her it was theirs, a place where they could escape whenever they wanted. Serena felt like she'd stepped into a different life, one where money wasn't a constant source of stress, where she didn't have to check her bank account before buying groceries. And most importantly, Lawrence kept his promise. He paid for Stanley's medical bills, every single one. Her brother was getting the treatment he needed, and the doctor said he was improving. Serena felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought Lawrence had saved her family, but there were things Serena didn't notice at first. Small details that didn't seem important until later. The Range Rover had a GPS tracker installed, something Lawrence said was for security in case the car was stolen. The designer clothes were beautiful, but Lawrence had picked out every single piece. He told her what to wear each day, what looked good on her, what didn't. The beachfront condo was in his name only, not theirs. And the joint bank account they shared? Lawrence controlled every dollar. Serena had access to the money, but every time she made a purchase, Lawrence got a notification. If she bought something he didn't approve of, he'd ask her about it later. "Why did you need that?" he'd say. "I just want to make sure you're being smart with our money." It didn't feel like control at first. It felt like being taken care of. Serena told herself that Lawrence was just being protective, that he wanted to make sure she was safe and secure. Then there was the wellness obsession. About 2 weeks into the marriage, Lawrence told Serena he'd scheduled an appointment with his private physician. "I just want to make sure you're healthy," he said. "I worry about you." Serena thought it was sweet. She went to the appointment expecting a routine checkup, but it wasn't routine. The doctor drew blood, ran a full panel of tests, did an EKG, took chest x-rays, and monitored her oxygen levels. Serena asked why all of this was necessary, and the doctor said it was standard preventative care. Lawrence had requested it specifically because he wanted to make sure she was in perfect health. Serena didn't think much of it. She was young and healthy, so the tests came back fine. But the appointments didn't stop. Every week, Lawrence scheduled another checkup. Every week, more blood tests, more scans, more monitoring. Lawrence also started controlling what Serena ate. He said he wanted them both to live healthier lives, that he'd been too careless with his own health in the past and didn't want to make the same mistakes. He hired a nutritionist who designed meal plans for Serena. Lean proteins, vegetables, no processed foods, no sugar, no alcohol. Lawrence framed it as something they were doing together, but Serena noticed that he didn't follow the same rules. He ate whatever he wanted. She was the only one being monitored. Lawrence also insisted that Serena take specific vitamins every day. He'd hand them to her each morning with a glass of water and watch her swallow them. "These will keep you strong," he'd say. "I need you healthy." He monitored her gym routine too. Serena had always enjoyed working out, but now Lawrence had opinions about what exercises she should be doing. He wanted her to focus on cardio, running, cycling, anything that kept her heart strong. He'd check her fitness tracker at the end of each day and ask how many miles she'd run, what her heart rate had been, whether she'd pushed herself hard enough. "Cardio is so important," he'd say. "It keeps your heart healthy. I want you around for a long time." Serena thought he was just being encouraging. She didn't realize he was maintaining the organ he planned to take. The isolation started slowly, so slowly that Serena didn't notice it happening. Her friends began texting her less and less, not because they didn't care, but because Serena was always unavailable. Lawrence didn't like it when she made plans without him. He'd say things like, "I thought we were spending today together," or "You're going out again? I barely see you anymore." When Serena did manage to meet up with friends, they'd ask her questions about Lawrence, about the rushed marriage, about why everything felt so secretive. Serena got defensive. She felt like they were judging her, like they didn't understand what she had. Lawrence noticed her frustration and used it. "Your friends are jealous," he'd say. "They don't want you to be happy. They want you to stay where you were, struggling like them. But you're better than that now." Serena started to believe him. She stopped answering their calls as often. She stopped making plans. She told herself it was just a phase, that once things settled down, she'd reconnect with everyone. Lawrence also took control of Serena's phone. He said it was just practical. He was paying for it, so it made sense for him to manage the account. But that meant he could see every call she made, every text she sent, every app she used. If someone contacted her and she didn't mention it, Lawrence would bring it up later. "I saw Rita texted you," he'd say. "What did she want?" At first, Serena thought he was just curious, but over time, it started to feel invasive. She stopped texting people altogether because she knew Lawrence would see it. She felt like she was being watched, even when he wasn't in the room. Lawrence also insisted on tracking her location. He said it was for her safety, that he just wanted to know she was okay. He'd text her throughout the day asking where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. If she didn't respond fast enough, he'd call. "I was worried about you," he'd say. "You didn't answer. I thought something happened." Serena's financial independence disappeared completely. Every purchase she made had to go through Lawrence. If she wanted to buy something, she had to ask. He'd usually say yes, but the act of asking made her feel like a child, like she didn't have autonomy over her own life. She couldn't even buy coffee without thinking about whether Lawrence would question it later. The $10,000 monthly allowance sounded generous on paper, but in practice, she had no control over it. Lawrence decided how it was spent. If Serena wanted to send money to her parents, she had to ask Lawrence first. If she wanted to buy a gift for Stanley, she had to clear it with him. She felt trapped, but she couldn't admit it to herself. She told herself this was what marriage was, that compromise meant giving up some independence, that Lawrence was just being responsible. But something felt wrong. Serena couldn't put her finger on it. But there were moments when she'd catch Lawrence watching her in a way that made her uncomfortable. Not with love or affection, but with something else. Something colder. She'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd smile and say, "Of course. I just can't believe how lucky I am to have you." Every time she questioned him, he had an answer ready. Every time she felt uneasy, he'd distract her with a gift or a romantic gesture. He'd book a surprise dinner, buy her something expensive, tell her how much he loved her. And Serena wanted so badly to believe it was real. She wanted to believe she'd finally found someone who cared about her, someone who would take care of her. So she ignored the instincts that told her something was off. She pushed down the unease. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she was overreacting, that this was just what it felt like to be loved by someone who had the means to show it. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, Serena knew. She knew something wasn't right. She just didn't know how bad it really was. And by the time she figured it out, it would be too late. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, comment, "I'm still here." Let's see who's still watching, because what comes next will shake you to your core. While Serena was adjusting to married life, Lawrence Robinson was running out of time. His heart was failing faster than anyone had predicted. In April 2025, just weeks after the wedding, he started having fainting spells. He'd be standing in his office or walking through his house, and suddenly the room would tilt and everything would go black. He'd wake up on the floor, disoriented, his chest aching. The arrhythmia got worse too. His heart would race for no reason, pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, and then it would slow down to almost nothing. The chest pain was constant now, a dull pressure that turned sharp whenever he moved too quickly. His private doctor examined him and delivered the news Lawrence had been dreading. "You have weeks," the doctor said. "Maybe a month if you're lucky. Your heart is shutting down." Lawrence knew a legal transplant was impossible. He'd already been removed from the waiting list. Even if he hadn't been, the waiting period for a heart could take months or years, and he didn't have that kind of time. He'd considered going overseas for an illegal transplant, but that came with its own risks. The travel alone could kill him in his condition. The facilities in countries with looser regulations were unreliable, and there was no guarantee he'd survive the procedure. He needed something closer, something he could control. And then he realized he already had the solution. He had a donor living in his house. Serena was young, healthy, and her heart was compatible with his. He'd been preparing her body for months without her knowing. All he had to do now was take what he needed. Lawrence reached out to Dr. Emil Petrov, a surgeon who had once been respected in his field, but had been struck off the medical register in 2018. Petrov had been caught performing illegal organ transplants in Moldova, selling kidneys and livers to wealthy patients who couldn't get them through legal channels. He'd fled to the United States before he could be prosecuted, and now he was living under the radar, doing odd medical jobs for cash. Lawrence offered him $500,000 to perform a heart transplant with no questions asked. Petrov didn't hesitate. He needed the money, and he didn't care where the heart came from. Lawrence told him the donor was willing, that everything was consensual. Petrov didn't ask for proof. He didn't want to know. Petrov assembled a small team. He brought in Dr. Claudia Vance, an anesthesiologist who had lost her license after being caught stealing prescription drugs from the hospital where she worked. She was struggling to pay rent and couldn't find legitimate work anymore. Lawrence offered her $50,000 to put someone to sleep and make sure they didn't wake up. She agreed. Petrov also recruited Nathan Cross, a surgical nurse who had been fired for falsifying patient records. Nathan was in debt and desperate. Lawrence offered him $30,000 to assist with the procedure and keep his mouth shut afterward. Nathan said yes. None of them asked who the donor was. None of them cared. They just wanted the money. Lawrence purchased a closed veterinary clinic on the outskirts of Charleston. It had been abandoned for years, but the building was still structurally sound. He paid contractors in cash to clean it up and install the equipment Petrov would need: surgical lights, an operating table, anesthesia machines, monitors, everything required for a transplant. The contractors thought they were setting up a private medical facility for someone who valued discretion. They didn't ask questions. Lawrence paid them well to keep quiet. Within 2 weeks, the clinic was ready. It looked like an abandoned building from the outside, but inside, it was a fully functional surgical suite. Everything was in place. All Lawrence needed now was the right moment. The morning of May 14th, 2025, started like any other day for Serena. She woke up next to Lawrence, made breakfast, and spent a few hours on her phone. She texted her mother around 10 in the morning. "Love you," she wrote. "Everything's perfect." She posted a photo on Instagram around noon, a picture of her and Lawrence by the pool, smiling, his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Blessed beyond measure." She had no idea it would be the last thing she ever posted. She had no idea that in a few hours, she'd be dead. That afternoon, Lawrence told Serena he had a surprise for her. "It's our 2-month anniversary," he said. Serena was confused because their actual anniversary wasn't for another week, but Lawrence insisted. "I know it's not exact," he said, "but I wanted to do something special. I booked us a day at a luxury spa, just you and me. No phones, no distractions. I want to spend the day taking care of you." Serena was touched. She thought it was romantic. She got dressed, put on one of the outfits Lawrence had picked out for her, and got into the Range Rover. Lawrence drove, and Serena sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone and talking about how excited she was. Security footage from a traffic camera later showed the car passing through an intersection. Serena was smiling. She was holding Lawrence's hand. She had no idea where they were really going. Lawrence pulled up to the veterinary clinic about 30 minutes later. The building looked run down from the outside, and Serena frowned. "This is the spa?" she asked. Lawrence smiled. "It's a private wellness facility," he said. "Very exclusive. They don't advertise. Trust me, you're going to love it." Serena hesitated, but she trusted Lawrence. She got out of the car and followed him inside. The interior didn't look like a spa. It looked clinical, sterile, like a hospital. But before Serena could ask any questions, Lawrence handed her a glass of champagne. "Let's celebrate," he said. Serena took the glass and drank. The champagne tasted slightly off, but she didn't think much of it. Within minutes, her vision started to blur. Her legs felt weak. She looked at Lawrence, confused, and tried to ask what was happening. But the words wouldn't come out. She collapsed, and Lawrence caught her before she hit the ground. Dr. Petrov and his team were already waiting. They moved quickly, lifting Serena onto the operating table and hooking her up to monitors. Dr. Claudia Vance administered more sedatives to keep her under. Nathan Cross prepared the surgical tools. Petrov scrubbed in and made the first incision. Serena's chest was opened, her ribs spread apart, and her heart was exposed. It was still beating, strong and healthy, exactly what Lawrence needed. Petrov worked carefully, clamping the major vessels and removing the heart from Serena's chest. He placed it in a medical-grade preservation container filled with cold saline solution. Serena's body went still. The monitors flatlined. She was gone. Petrov moved immediately to Lawrence, who was already prepped on a second operating table. The transplant took hours, but Petrov was experienced. He connected Lawrence's major vessels to the donor heart, flushed the organ with blood, and shocked it back to life. The heart started beating in Lawrence's chest. His monitors stabilized. The transplant was a success. Lawrence would live. Serena's body was wrapped in plastic and loaded into the back of a van. Nathan Cross drove it to a remote area in the Francis Marion National Forest, dug a shallow grave, and buried her. By the time he got back, the clinic had been cleaned. All the equipment was sterilized. All the evidence was gone. Lawrence Robinson stayed in the veterinary clinic for 5 days after the transplant. Dr. Petrov and his team monitored him around the clock, making sure his body didn't reject the new heart. The first 48 hours were the most critical. Lawrence ran a fever, and his blood pressure fluctuated, but Petrov managed to stabilize him with medications. By the third day, Lawrence was sitting up, eating solid food, and talking about when he could go home. By the 5th day, he was walking around the clinic, testing his strength, feeling the steady rhythm of Serena's heart beating in his chest. He felt alive again, stronger than he had in years. Petrov told him he needed to take it easy for at least a few more weeks, but Lawrence didn't want to wait. He had things to do. He had a story to tell. While Lawrence was recovering, Serena's family and friends were trying to reach her. Her mother, Charlene, called her multiple times on May 15th, the day after she disappeared. The calls went straight to voicemail. Charlene texted her, asking if everything was okay, if she was eating well, if Lawrence was treating her right. A few hours later, Charlene received a text back. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. Love you." Charlene felt relieved, but something about the message felt off. Serena always called her back. She always wanted to talk, but Charlene told herself not to worry. Maybe Serena was just adjusting to married life. Maybe she was spending time with her husband. Rita, Serena's friend, also tried to reach her. She sent a text on May 16th, asking if they could meet up for coffee. The reply came hours later. "Can't right now. Things are hectic. I'll call you soon." Rita frowned at the message. It didn't sound like Serena. Serena used emojis in almost every text. She was chatty, warm, full of energy. This message felt cold, distant, like someone was trying to get her to stop asking questions. Rita texted back, asking if everything was okay. The response was short. "Everything's great. Don't worry." Rita didn't believe it, but she didn't know what to do. She thought maybe Serena was pulling away because Lawrence was controlling her, but she didn't have proof. She just had a bad feeling. Stanley, Serena's brother, also tried calling her. He'd been recovering from his accident and wanted to thank her for everything Lawrence had done to help with his medical bills. He called twice on May 17th, and both times the calls went unanswered. He sent a text. "Hey sis, just wanted to say thanks. Hope you're doing okay. Love you." The reply came back an hour later. "Love you too. So glad you're getting better. I'll visit soon." Stanley smiled when he read it, but later that night he mentioned to his mother that Serena seemed different. "She didn't call me back," he said. "She always calls me back." Charlene agreed. Something felt wrong, but they didn't know what. The person texting Serena's family and friends wasn't Serena. It was Lawrence. He had her phone, and he'd been responding to messages to make it look like she was still alive and well. He kept the texts short and vague, avoiding anything that required a real conversation. He couldn't risk a phone call because someone might realize it wasn't her voice, so he just sent enough messages to keep people from panicking. He needed time. Time to heal, time to figure out his next move, time to build his story. On May 19th, 5 days after Serena's death, Lawrence left the clinic. Petrov gave him a final checkup, reminded him to take his anti-rejection medications, and told him to avoid strenuous activity. Lawrence thanked him, paid the rest of the money he owed, and drove home. The next morning, May 20th, Lawrence went to his neighbors and told them that Serena had left him. He looked upset, tired, like a man who'd been through something difficult. He said they'd had a huge argument a few days ago, that Serena had accused him of being controlling, that she'd packed a bag and walked out. "She said she needed space," Lawrence told them. "She said I didn't understand her, that I was suffocating her. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. She just left." The neighbors were sympathetic. They told him they were sorry, that maybe she'd come back once she cooled down. Lawrence shook his head. "I don't think she's coming back," he said. "She was never satisfied with what I gave her. She always wanted more. She probably found someone else who could give her what she wanted." Later that day, Lawrence filed a missing persons report with the Charleston Police Department. He walked into the station, spoke to an officer at the front desk, and explained that his wife had been missing for several days. He said they'd had an argument on May 14th, that Serena had stormed out, and that he hadn't seen her since. He said he'd been texting her, trying to reach her, but she wasn't responding anymore. He said he was worried about her. that maybe something bad had happened. The officer took down his statement and asked for a photo of Serena. Lawrence provided one, along with a description of what she'd been wearing the last time he saw her. He made himself look like a concerned husband, someone who just wanted his wife to come home safely. But when the officer asked if there were any marital problems, Lawrence didn't hesitate. "She was unstable," he said. "Dramatic. She wasn't happy with me. She kept saying I was too controlling, that she deserved better. I gave her everything, but it was never enough. I think she might have left to be with someone else." The officer assigned the case to Detective Darnell Hughes, a seasoned investigator with the Charleston PD Homicide Division. Hughes had been working missing persons cases for over a decade, and he'd learned to trust his instincts. When he read Lawrence's statement, something didn't sit right with him. The story felt rehearsed, too neat, too convenient. A young woman disappears after an argument with her much older, much wealthier husband? Hughes had seen that story before, and it rarely ended well. He started digging into the details. He looked at Serena's bank account and saw that there had been no activity since May 14th. No withdrawals, no purchases, nothing. He checked her social media and saw that her last post had been on May 14th, the same day Lawrence claimed she'd left. Serena had been posting daily, sometimes multiple times a day, sharing photos of her life, her outfits, her meals. And then suddenly, there was nothing. Complete silence. That didn't match the behavior of someone who'd just walked out on her husband. Hughes went to Lawrence's house to conduct a follow-up interview. He asked to see Serena's belongings, and Lawrence showed him around. Her phone charger was still plugged into the wall. Her purse was sitting on the kitchen counter with her wallet inside. Her clothes were still hanging in the closet. Her passport was in a drawer. Hughes asked Lawrence why Serena would leave without taking any of these things. Lawrence shrugged. "She was upset," he said. "She wasn't thinking clearly. She probably just grabbed what she could and left." But Hughes wasn't buying it. Nobody leaves home without their ID, their money, their phone charger. Nobody disappears like that unless something forces them to. Hughes started pulling surveillance footage from the area around Lawrence's home. He found footage from a toll booth on the highway that showed Lawrence's Range Rover driving toward the Francis Marion National Forest on the afternoon of May 14th. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m. There was a passenger in the car, a woman who matched Serena's description. She appeared to be alive, sitting in the passenger seat, her head visible through the windshield. Hughes kept searching and found more footage from the same toll booth later that night, around 9:15 p.m. Lawrence's car was driving back toward Charleston, but this time he was alone. No passenger. The back seat looked empty. Hughes felt his instincts kick in. Something had happened during those hours between the two trips. Something that made Serena disappear. Hughes pulled Serena's phone records and checked when her phone was last pinged. The location wasn't at Lawrence's home. It wasn't at a hotel or a friend's house. It was at a closed veterinary clinic on the outskirts of the city. Hughes ran the property records and found that the clinic had been purchased 3 months earlier by a shell company. When he traced the ownership of that company, he found that it was registered under Lawrence Robinson's name. Hughes felt his pulse quicken. Why would Lawrence take Serena to a closed veterinary clinic? Why would her phone stop working there? And why did Lawrence come back alone? Hughes knew he had enough to get a search warrant. He brought his findings to a judge, explained the inconsistencies in Lawrence's story, and showed him the surveillance footage and phone records. The judge signed the warrant immediately. On May 22nd, Hughes and a team of officers arrived at the veterinary clinic with forensic specialists and evidence collection equipment. The building looked abandoned from the outside, its windows boarded up, weeds growing around the entrance. But when they forced the door open and stepped inside, they found something that made Hughes's blood run cold. The place had been cleaned recently, but not well enough. There were traces of blood on the floor, small droplets that someone had tried to scrub away but hadn't completely removed. Hughes had the blood swabbed and sent to the lab for testing. It would take a few days to get results, but he had a feeling it would match Serena Mackenzie. They found medical waste in a dumpster behind the building. Used syringes, blood-stained gauze, surgical gloves, all of it bagged up like someone had tried to dispose of evidence, but hadn't finished the job. They found surgical equipment inside the clinic that had been wiped down, but still had residue on it. An operating table, anesthesia machines, monitors. This wasn't just a place where someone had been hurt. This was a place where someone had been operated on. Hughes photographed everything, documented every piece of evidence, and had it all collected and tagged. He knew this case had just turned into something much bigger than a missing persons investigation. Hughes also deployed cadaver dogs to the Francis Marion National Forest, the area where Lawrence's car had been seen on surveillance footage. The dogs were trained to detect human remains, even if they were buried or hidden. The search teams moved through the forest, slowly, methodically, covering miles of dense woods and undergrowth. It was hard work, and the heat made it worse. But Hughes wasn't going to stop until he found Serena Mackenzie. He owed her that much. He owed her family that much. The dogs searched for hours, following scents that only they could detect, and Hughes waited, hoping they'd find something that would give him the answers he needed. Days after Serena Mackenzie disappeared, 2 hikers were walking through the Francis Marion National Forest. They were a couple from out of town, visiting Charleston for the weekend, and they'd decided to explore one of the trails that wound through the dense woods. It was a hot afternoon, humid, the kind of heat that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. They'd been walking for about an hour when they decided to step off the main trail to find some shade. That's when they saw it. The ground looked disturbed, like someone had been digging recently. The dirt was piled up in a way that didn't seem natural, and there were drag marks leading from the edge of the clearing to the spot where the soil had been moved. The man took a few steps closer and noticed something sticking out of the ground. It looked like fabric, dark and partially buried. His wife told him to leave it alone, to call someone, but he couldn't help himself. He knelt down and brushed some of the dirt away. That's when he saw the hand. They both stumbled backward, the woman gasping, the man fumbling for his phone. He dialed 911, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. He told the operator what they'd found, gave them the GPS coordinates from his hiking app, and then they both sat on a fallen log about 20 feet away and waited. They didn't talk. They didn't look at each other. They just sat there, staring at the ground, trying not to think about what was buried beneath it. Within 30 minutes, police vehicles started arriving. Detective Darnell Hughes was among the first to show up. He'd been coordinating the search with the cadaver dogs, and when he got the call that hikers had found a body, he knew immediately it was Serena. He'd been hoping he was wrong, hoping she'd turn up somewhere alive, maybe hiding from Lawrence, maybe scared but okay. But deep down, he'd known this was how it would end. Hughes approached the site carefully, stepping around the disturbed soil, trying not to contaminate the scene. The forensic team was right behind him, setting up equipment, taking photographs, marking the area with yellow tape. They started excavating slowly, brushing away dirt with small tools, exposing more of the body. It was wrapped in plastic, thick industrial sheeting that had been taped shut. The body was face down, partially decomposed from 4 days in the heat and humidity. Hughes could see enough to know it was a young woman, early 20s, with dark hair. She was wearing a dress that matched the description Lawrence had given when he filed the missing persons report. Hughes felt his jaw tighten. He knew who this was. But knowing and confirming were 2 different things. The medical examiner arrived an hour later. Dr. Mary Andrews was a forensic pathologist who'd been working with the Charleston PD for over 15 years. She'd seen her share of bodies, gunshot victims, overdoses, accidents, homicides. But something about this case felt different. She knelt beside the grave and examined the body without touching it, taking notes, observing the position, the wrapping, the condition. She told Hughes that the body would need to be transported to the morgue for a full autopsy, but based on what she could see, the victim had been dead for at least 3 to 4 days. The decomposition was consistent with the timeline. Hughes asked if she could confirm the identity, and Dr. Andrews said they'd need dental records to be certain. Hughes called the station and had someone pull Serena Mackenzie's dental records from her last visit to the dentist. By late that evening, the comparison was complete. It was Serena. The autopsy took place the next morning. Dr. Andrews worked methodically, documenting every detail, every injury, every abnormality. What she found was disturbing in ways she hadn't expected. The cause of death was cardiac arrest, but it hadn't been natural. Serena's toxicology report showed high levels of propofol and midazolam in her system, both drugs used in surgical anesthesia. She'd been sedated, put under so deeply that her heart had stopped. But that wasn't what killed her. The anesthesia had been administered in such high doses that it induced cardiac arrest. Serena had died before anything else was done to her. She hadn't felt pain. She hadn't been conscious. But she had been murdered. Dr. Andrews examined the body further and found something that made her stop. There was a surgical incision running from Serena's sternum down to her abdomen. The cut was clean, precise, not the kind of wound you'd see in a stabbing or a random act of violence. This was a medical incision, the kind made by someone who knew what they were doing. Dr. Andrews opened the incision further and looked inside. Serena's chest cavity had been opened via thoracotomy, a procedure used in open-heart surgery. Her ribs had been spread apart, and the organs inside had been disturbed. But the most shocking discovery was what was missing. Serena's heart was gone. It had been removed cleanly, surgically, with cuts that showed medical precision. Whoever did this knew how to harvest an organ. This wasn't a murder in the traditional sense. This was an operation. Dr. Andrews looked for other signs of trauma. There were no defensive wounds on Serena's hands or arms. No bruises, no scratches, no indication that she'd fought back. That made sense if she'd been unconscious when it happened. But there was something under her fingernails, small traces of skin and DNA. Dr. Andrews collected the samples and sent them to the lab for testing. She also found residue on the incision site. It was surgical glue, the kind used to close wounds in operating rooms. There were fibers too, tiny threads of medical-grade gauze that had been left behind. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. This had been planned. This had been executed by someone with medical training, and whoever did it had tried to cover their tracks, but they'd made mistakes. Hughes got the autopsy report later that afternoon. He sat in his office reading through Dr. Andrews' findings and felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Serena Mackenzie had been sedated. Her heart had been harvested while she was unconscious, and then her body had been dumped in the woods like trash. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a domestic dispute gone wrong. This was premeditated. This was organized. And Hughes knew exactly who was responsible. He pulled up the phone records again and confirmed that Serena's last known location had been the veterinary clinic owned by Lawrence Robinson. The blood found at the clinic had come back as a match for Serena. The DNA under her fingernails was being tested, but Hughes didn't need the results to know what they'd show. Lawrence Robinson had killed his wife, and he'd done it to save himself. Hughes called in the FBI. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was organ trafficking, illegal medical procedures, possibly conspiracy. He needed more resources, more expertise, and more authority to bring Lawrence down. Special Agent Nicole Hartman from the FBI's Organ Trafficking Task Force arrived the next day. She reviewed the evidence, listened to Hughes's briefing, and agreed that Lawrence Robinson was their prime suspect. But they needed more. They needed to prove that Lawrence had orchestrated the entire thing, that he'd hired people to perform the transplant, that he'd planned Serena's death from the moment he met her. Hartman started pulling financial records, looking for payments that didn't make sense, wire transfers to suspicious accounts, anything that would tie Lawrence to the crime. Hughes and Hartman also went back to the veterinary clinic. They brought in forensic specialists who used luminol to detect blood that had been cleaned up. The entire operating room lit up under the black light. There was blood everywhere. On the floor, on the walls, on the equipment. It had been scrubbed, but it was still there. They found more surgical tools in a storage closet. tools that had been wiped down but still had trace amounts of biological material on them. They found anesthesia equipment that matched the drugs found in Serena's system. They found everything they needed to prove that Serena had been killed in that clinic. But they still needed to connect Lawrence directly to the people who'd helped him. They needed names. They needed testimony. They needed someone to talk. The investigation was moving fast now. Hughes and Hartman worked around the clock, piecing together the evidence, building a case that would hold up in court. They knew they were dealing with a man who had money, power, and influence. Lawrence Robinson wasn't going to go down easy. He'd hire the best lawyers, fight every charge, try to discredit the evidence. But Hughes didn't care. He'd seen what Lawrence had done to Serena. He'd seen the surgical precision, the cold planning, the complete lack of remorse. Lawrence Robinson had treated Serena Mackenzie like she was a piece of property, something he could use and discard. And Hughes was going to make sure he paid for it. The investigation is about to unravel a conspiracy so planned, it feels like fiction. If this content is eye-opening, like, subscribe, and share with loved ones. Stories like Serena's are warnings that could protect someone you care about. Once Detective Darnell Hughes and Special Agent Nicole Hartman confirmed that Serena Mackenzie had been murdered in the veterinary clinic, they needed to build a case that would put Lawrence Robinson behind bars for the rest of his life. They needed hard evidence, digital trails, financial records, anything that would prove Lawrence had planned this from the beginning. Hughes obtained a search warrant for Lawrence's home, his office, and all of his electronic devices. Then, a team of investigators showed up at Lawrence's mansion with boxes and evidence bags. They seized his laptop, his phone, his tablets, and every hard drive they could find. Lawrence stood in his living room, arms crossed, watching them tear through his belongings. He didn't say a word. He just watched. And when they asked him to come down to the station for questioning, he called his lawyer and refused to speak. The forensic IT team took Lawrence's laptop and started digging. Even though Lawrence had deleted his search history, the team was able to recover it using specialized software. What they found was damning. Lawrence had been researching organ transplants for months. His search history included queries like, "How long can heart survive outside body?" "Illegal organ transplant United States," and "Young donor heart compatibility, O negative." He'd researched propofol and midazolam, the exact drugs found in Serena's system. He'd searched for "How to stage disappearance" and "Can police trace deleted messages?" Every search was time-stamped, creating a timeline that showed Lawrence had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The IT team compiled everything into a report and handed it to Hughes. It was exactly what they needed. Hughes also brought in Trevor Sinclair, a forensic accountant who specialized in tracing financial crimes. Sinclair spent days combing through Lawrence's bank records, wire transfers, and shell company transactions. What he found was a paper trail that led straight to the crime. 2 weeks before Serena's death, Lawrence had wired $500,000 to an account registered under the name Emil Petrov. Sinclair traced the account back to a man who had no legitimate medical practice, no business license, no reason to receive that much money unless he was doing something illegal. Sinclair also found a $75,000 payment made 3 months earlier for the purchase of the veterinary clinic. The payment had been made through a shell company, but Sinclair traced it back to Lawrence. And then there was the life insurance policy. 1 week after Lawrence married Serena, he took out a $2 million life insurance policy on her. He was the sole beneficiary. If Serena died, Lawrence would collect $2 million. Sinclair put all of this into a report and handed it to Agent Hartman. The financial evidence alone was enough to prove motive. The FBI's cybercrimes unit also recovered encrypted messages from Lawrence's phone. He'd been using an app that was supposed to delete messages after they were sent, but the FBI had tools that could recover them from the server. The messages were explicit, undeniable proof of what Lawrence had done. On May 10th, 4 days before Serena's death, Lawrence sent a message to Dr. Emil Petrov. "She's O negative. Perfect match. Procedure scheduled May 14th. On May 12th, he sent a message to Nathan Cross, the surgical nurse. "Destroy all evidence post-op. I'll handle disposal." And on May 13th, the day before Serena died, he sent a message to Dr. Claudia Vance, the anesthesiologist. Full sedation. She can't wake up. The messages were recovered, time-stamped, and added to the growing pile of evidence against Lawrence Robinson. But Hughes and Hartman wanted more. They needed medical proof that Lawrence had received Serena's heart. They obtained another search warrant, this time for Lawrence's medical records. His private physician initially refused to hand them over, citing patient confidentiality. But the warrant forced his hand. The records showed that Lawrence had been treated for advanced heart disease, that his heart function had been critically low, and that he'd been removed from the transplant list. But the most important piece of information was in the recent files. On May 14, 2025, the same day Serena disappeared, Lawrence had undergone a heart transplant. With this evidence in hand, Hughes and Hartman moved quickly. They arrested Dr. Emil Petrov on May 21, 2025. Petrov was living in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Charleston, trying to lay low. When the FBI showed up at his door, he didn't resist. He knew it was over. Hartman offered him a deal. If he testified against Lawrence, told them everything he knew, and cooperated fully with the investigation, the FBI would recommend immunity from the most serious charges. Petrov took the deal. He told them everything. He admitted that Lawrence had hired him to perform an illegal heart transplant, that Lawrence had provided the donor, and that he'd known the donor was Lawrence's wife. He said Lawrence had told him the procedure was consensual, but Petrov admitted he never asked for proof. He just wanted the money. Petrov's testimony was recorded, signed, and entered into evidence. Dr. Claudia Vance and Nathan Cross were arrested the same day. Vance broke down almost immediately. She admitted that Lawrence had paid her $50,000 to sedate Serena and keep her under during the procedure. She said she knew it was wrong, but she was desperate. She'd lost her medical license, couldn't find work, and was drowning in debt. She cried during the interrogation, saying she didn't know Serena would die, that she thought it was just a transplant, that she didn't realize she was helping to commit murder. Nathan Cross, the surgical nurse, was quieter. He admitted that Lawrence had paid him $30,000 to assist with the procedure and dispose of the evidence. He said he'd helped wrap Serena's body and transport it to the forest. He said Lawrence had told him where to bury her. Both Vance and Cross signed confessions. All three members of the surgical team had turned on Lawrence. The case was airtight. On May 22, 2025, Detective Hughes got a tip from airport security. Lawrence Robinson had booked a one-way flight to Dubai, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. He was planning to flee. Hughes immediately contacted TSA and had Lawrence flagged for secondary screening. When Lawrence arrived at Charleston International Airport that morning, he checked in for his flight, went through security, and was pulled aside by TSA agents. They told him it was a routine screening, nothing to worry about. But when they opened his checked luggage, they found something that made them call the police immediately. Inside the suitcase was a medical-grade cooler, the kind used to transport biological samples. The agents opened it and found surgical tools, vials of medication, and biological samples that would later be tested and matched to Serena's DNA. Lawrence had been planning to take evidence with him, possibly to cover his tracks or use it later. It was a mistake that sealed his fate. Detective Hughes and Agent Hartman arrived at the airport within 30 minutes. They found Lawrence sitting in a TSA holding room, calm and composed, like he was just waiting for a delayed flight. Hughes walked in, looked him in the eye, and told him he was under arrest. Lawrence didn't react. He didn't look surprised or scared or angry. He just stared at Hughes, expressionless. Hughes read him his rights and listed the charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, illegal organ trafficking, and fraud. Bail would be denied because Lawrence was a flight risk. He was going to jail, and he wasn't getting out. Lawrence finally spoke. "I want my lawyer," he said. And that was all he said. Lawrence was taken into custody and transported to the Charleston County Detention Center. His legal team showed up within hours. They were expensive, high-profile attorneys who specialized in defending wealthy clients. They held a press conference outside the courthouse and laid out their defense strategy. Serena Mackenzie entered this marriage for money, one of the attorneys said. She knew what she was getting into. Our client was a dying man, desperate to survive. He made mistakes, yes, but this was not premeditated murder. This was a man trying to stay alive. The attorneys painted Lawrence as a victim of circumstance, a man who'd been backed into a corner by his failing health and had made a series of bad decisions. They claimed that Serena had been complicit, that she'd known about the transplant, that she'd agreed to it. It was a lie, and everyone knew it, but it was the only defense they had. The prosecution wasn't buying it. The lead prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jordan Reeves, held his own press conference and laid out the facts. Lawrence Robinson didn't make mistakes, Reeves said. He planned this. He researched it. He paid for it. He married a young woman, not because he loved her, but because he needed her heart. He sedated her, harvested her organ, and threw her body away like garbage. This wasn't desperation. This was murder. And we will prove it in court. The case was scheduled for trial in February 2026. The entire country was watching. Lawrence Robinson, the millionaire real estate mogul, was going to be held accountable for what he'd done to Serena Mackenzie. This case is far from over. Your support helps us continue covering stories that demand to be told. Join our YouTube membership for exclusive perks and premium content. Thank you for being here. Now let's talk about what investigators discovered about Lawrence's past and the terrifying possibility that Serena wasn't his first victim. After Lawrence Robinson's arrest, Detective Darnell Hughes and Special Agent Nicole Hartman started looking into his past. They wanted to know if Serena Mackenzie was the first woman Lawrence had targeted, or if there were others. The first place they looked was his previous marriage. Lawrence had been married before to a woman named Vanessa Robinson. They'd married in 2001 and divorced in 2019, just a few years before Lawrence met Serena. The divorce had been unusual from the start. The court documents were sealed, which meant the public couldn't access the details of why the marriage ended. But investigative journalists managed to uncover some information that had been buried. In 2019, just before the divorce was finalized, Vanessa had filed an emergency restraining order against Lawrence. The court documents, which had been partially unsealed due to public interest in the case, revealed that Vanessa had discovered Lawrence researching organ transplants. She'd found search histories on his computer, documents about illegal medical procedures, and communications with people she didn't recognize. She became terrified. She told the court that she feared for her safety, that she believed Lawrence was capable of hurting her, and that she needed protection. The restraining order was granted, the divorce was finalized, and Vanessa disappeared. Hughes read the documents and felt his stomach turn. Lawrence had been planning this for years. Serena wasn't his first target. She was just the first one he'd managed to trap. Hughes and Hartman also started looking into unsolved missing persons cases in Charleston. Between 2018 and 2023, 3 young women had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The first was Tamara Hayes, a 22-year-old waitress who vanished in 2018. She was last seen leaving her shift at a restaurant located inside one of Lawrence's hotels. Security footage showed her walking through the lobby, but she never made it to her car. Her family reported her missing, and the police investigated, but they never found her. The case went cold. The second was Brianna Cole, a 24-year-old event planner who disappeared in 2020. She'd been working on a contract basis for Lawrence's real estate company, organizing corporate events and charity galas. She was last seen leaving Lawrence's office building after a meeting. Her phone was found in a trash can 2 blocks away, but there was no sign of Brianna. The third was Jasmine Whitmore, a 26-year-old woman who disappeared in 2022. Friends said she'd been seeing an older man she met on a dating app, someone wealthy and charming. She'd told them she was going to meet him for dinner, and she never came home. Her case was also unsolved. All 3 women fit a pattern. They were young, in their early to mid-20s. They were healthy, active, and financially struggling. They were the kind of women who might be tempted by the promise of money, security, and a better life. And all 3 had crossed paths with Lawrence Robinson in some way. Tamara worked at his hotel, Brianna worked for his company, Jasmine had been on the same dating apps Lawrence used to find Serena. Hughes and Hartman couldn't prove that Lawrence had killed these women, but the similarities were too strong to ignore. They reopened all 3 cases and started investigating Lawrence's connection to each victim. They pulled phone records, financial transactions, surveillance footage, anything that might tie him to the disappearances. It was slow work, and they didn't have enough evidence yet to charge him with anything beyond Serena's murder. But they believed there were more victims. They just had to find them. The theory among investigators was that Lawrence had tried this before. Maybe he'd targeted women in the past, but couldn't complete the procedure. Maybe the victims had escaped, or maybe Lawrence had failed to find someone with the right blood type. Or worse, maybe there were other victims whose bodies had never been found. Women who'd been buried in places no one would ever look. The idea was horrifying, but it made sense. Lawrence had been researching organ transplants for years. He'd known his heart was failing long before he met Serena. It was possible that she wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one the police had found. Hughes made it his mission to find out the truth. He owed it to Serena. He owed it to the other women who might still be out there, waiting to be found. While the investigation continued, Serena's family was trying to process the nightmare their lives had become. Byron and Charlene McKenzie were devastated. They'd trusted Lawrence. They'd believed he was going to take care of their daughter, that he was going to give her the life she deserved. Instead, he'd killed her. Charlene couldn't stop blaming herself. "I should have stopped her," she said in an interview with a local news station. "I should have seen the danger. I knew it was too fast, too perfect. But I didn't want to ruin her happiness. I thought she'd finally found someone who would take care of her." She broke down crying, unable to finish the sentence. Byron was quieter, but his anger was obvious. "He used our son's accident to trap our daughter," he said. "He knew we were desperate. He knew we'd do anything to save Stanley, and he used that against us. He's a monster." Stanley McKenzie, who had fully recovered from his scooter accident, was racked with guilt. He'd survived because of the money Lawrence had paid for his medical treatment. But that money had come at the cost of his sister's life. "She saved my life," Stanley said, "and I couldn't save hers. I didn't even know she was in danger. I thought she was happy. I thought she was safe. And now she's gone, and it's because of me." His parents tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, that Lawrence had manipulated all of them. But Stanley couldn't let it go. He felt like he owed Serena something, a debt he could never repay. Rita, Serena's friend, was also struggling. She was the one who'd introduced Serena to the dating apps, the one who'd told her it was a smart way to find security. She felt responsible for what had happened. "If I hadn't suggested those apps, she'd still be alive," Rita said. "I thought I was helping her. I thought I was giving her a way out, but I led her straight to him." Rita couldn't change what had happened, but she could try to prevent it from happening to someone else. She started a foundation in Serena's name, an organization that helped young women escape financial exploitation and abusive relationships. The foundation provided resources, legal support, and safe housing for women who were trapped in situations they couldn't get out of on their own. Rita wanted Serena's death to mean something. She wanted other women to have the chance Serena never got. The reaction in Charleston was mixed at first. Lawrence Robinson had been a respected figure in the community for decades. He donated to charities, funded scholarships, supported political campaigns. A lot of people didn't want to believe he was capable of murder. They thought the accusations were exaggerated, that there had to be some mistake. But as the evidence became public, as the details of the crime were revealed, public opinion shifted. People were horrified. They were disgusted. They realized that the man they'd admired, the man they'd trusted, was a predator who'd killed his own wife to save himself. The community turned on him. His name was removed from buildings he'd donated to. His hotels saw boycotts. His business empire started to crumble. Lawrence Robinson had once been untouchable. Now he was hated. The tragic irony of Serena's story was that she'd thought she was securing her future. She'd believed Lawrence loved her, that he cared about her, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. She'd seen the marriage as a way to escape poverty, to help her family, to finally have the stability she'd always wanted. But she'd never seen herself as a victim. She'd never realized that from the moment Lawrence found her profile on that dating app, she was already marked for death. She'd married for financial security. Lawrence had married for physical survival. Only one of them had understood the real agreement. And by the time Serena figured it out, it was too late. As of November 2025, Lawrence Robinson is being held in a maximum security detention center, awaiting trial. The trial is set to begin in February 2026, and the prosecution is seeking life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lawrence's defense team has outlined their strategy. They're planning to claim diminished capacity, arguing that Lawrence's failing health and fear of death affected his judgment. They're going to paint Serena as complicit, suggesting that she knew about the transplant and agreed to it. They're going to try to make Lawrence look like a desperate, dying man who made a terrible mistake. But the prosecution isn't going to let that narrative stand. Assistant District Attorney Jordan Reeves has made it clear that this was premeditated murder, that Lawrence planned every detail, and that Serena was an innocent victim who never had a chance. The evidence against Lawrence is overwhelming. The medical cooler found in his luggage at the airport contained Serena's DNA. The encrypted messages recovered from his phone showed that he'd planned the procedure weeks in advance. The financial records proved he'd paid Dr. Emil Petrov, Dr. Claudia Vance, and Nathan Cross to perform the transplant. All three members of the surgical team have agreed to testify against him. The autopsy report shows exactly how Serena died, and Lawrence's own medical records prove that he's walking around with Serena's heart in his chest. The prosecution has everything they need to convict him. The defense is going to fight, but most legal experts believe Lawrence doesn't have a chance. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. People are horrified by what Lawrence did, but they're also asking bigger questions. How far will people go to survive? What happens when wealth and desperation collide? Can money really buy anything, even life itself? And most disturbingly, how many other people have disappeared because someone richer, someone more powerful, decided they deserve to keep living at someone else's expense? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're questions that need to be asked. And until those answers come, the families of Tamara Hayes, Brianna Cole, and Jasmine Whitmore will keep waiting, wondering if their daughters were victims of the same man who killed Serena McKenzie. Serena McKenzie thought she was securing her future. She thought she'd found someone who would take care of her, someone who would protect her from the poverty and instability she'd grown up with. She didn't realize she was signing her own death warrant. Her story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. In a world where money can buy almost anything, can it buy time? Can it buy survival at someone else's expense? The answer, it seems, is yes, and that should terrify all of us. If Serena's story has affected you, if it's made you think twice about the dangers hiding behind wealth and charm, then share this video. Talk about it. Post it. Make sure other people hear this story, because awareness is the first line of defense against predators like Lawrence Robinson. If you or someone you know is in a relationship that feels controlling, isolating, or dangerous, get help. Reach out to someone you trust. Call a hotline. Leave before it's too late. Your life is worth more than any amount of money. Your life is worth more than someone else's survival. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And remember Serena McKenzie. Remember what happened to her. Remember that she was a real person with a family, with dreams, with a future that was stolen from her. Don't let her death be forgotten.